Now, when I'm speaking about life, obviously I have the tree of life in my mind, and I think this is a very interesting overview of things that are alive, if you like. So we have basically three different, what is called kingdom, and the biologists amongst you will do that in a lot of detail. So we've got the bacteria, we've got the archaea, and we've got the eukaryotes, the eukaryota, and of course most of us belong to the eukaryotes. And if you look at that, we belong to this tiny little branch here, to the Animalia. It's just this tiny little thing here. And if we look at, primates like us, humans, it's just a tiny, teensy-weensy little thing. So that is all the things that are basically alive. Now, of course, we have other things where our definition of life becomes a little bit more, almost interesting. What about this guy? You know what this is? It's the Ebola virus, exactly. So let me quickly write that down. So that's Ebola. Is a virus a living thing? Yes or yes? No. It's a really tricky thing with a virus, They could be that they once were alive, they once were able to reproduce and do things, and they sort of react to signals, as you will discover when we talk about viruses of bacteria, so-called bacteriophages. Interestingly enough, people have found some really bizarre viruses quite lately. These are what they are called the megaviruses. For example, Pandora virus. This is a real monster. Luckily, it doesn't affect us. It just gives amoeba the flu. But this is really bizarre, and when people did some analysis, and again, that is something that we are going to do in your degree, some bioinformatic analysis. You compare proteins, you compare genes with each other. And they found that these Pandora viruses are completely alien things. So they could have arrived from outer space, really. And now scientists believe that it's not just these three kingdoms that I showed you, that these Pandora viruses actually form a fourth kingdom, which is absolutely bizarre. So these are really the groups of life as we know it. But I would like to go a little bit further into detail and define a little bit more what is life, as we did. And for me, one of the characteristic features of life is what is called emergence. This thing here. Emergence simply means that the whole is more than the sum of its pieces. You put different things together, and each thing just simply has a simple function. And all of a sudden, what you just built does something completely different. So, for example, if you look at your phone that you nicely used, this is just simply an accumulation of some electronic particles, some electronic components. But if you put them together, you can all of a sudden, you can phone somebody, you can phone a friend, you can text, life is fajitas. And this is a very interesting property, and I think that is a very characteristic feature of life. So what you see here is, if you like, the biochemical pathways that are going on in every single cell at the moment. So, for example, you have this round thing here in the middle. Anyone knows what this biochemical pathway is? Loud? It is the Krebs cycle, exactly. This is the cycle, this is a biochemical pathway that generates, if you like, energy, that breaks down some components, or some biochemical components, and that then fuels into the little powerhouses of the cell. Here's another cycle, which is sort of a spiral. Can you see that? That is for the degradation of fatty acids. And this line here that goes into the Krebs cycle, that is glycolysis. This happens to you when you just had lunch, for example. It's the breakdown of sugars. You will hear about these different biochemical pathways in the lectures in detail, and you will start to you will love to hate these cycles. They're the biochemistry, but they are good fun, I think. Oops. You just have to find the right thing. Where is it? Ah, yeah. Now, if you look at these different biochemical reactions, you will find that they are all made up of rather simple components. But these components, they have sort of the power. So here we have a very basic negative feedback loop, which consists of component A, this guy here, which is produced, and this component A then is converted into component B. Pretty naft. B is then somehow consumed again in further reactions. It's, for example, fueled into the Krebs cycle. But B then does something amazing. B downregulates the production of A. So it goes back and it says A should no longer be produced. Now think about it, what would happen in this case? Okay, we have lots of A. If we've got lots of A, we produce lots of B. But then lots of B would inhibit the production of A. So if we've got lots of B, our production of A goes down. So A goes down. What happens to B if A goes down? It goes down. What happens if we have less B with A? It goes up again because there is less there that would stop the production from A. So all of a sudden A goes up. What happens if A goes up? B goes up. What happens if B goes up? A goes down. Right? It's really strange. And we can mathematically, in a way, illustrate that, what happens in this case. And in this case, if we wait long enough, then the amount of A and B, they will reach a sort of a midline, and they won't change. At the beginning, they might, they show this a little bit oscillating behavior, but sooner or later they will stabilize there. Well, it's a very characteristic feature of these negative feedback loops, that they stabilize the biological system. Here's another one for you. Looks pretty much the same, but this time it is a positive feedback loop. That means high concentration of B will lead to an even higher concentration of A. And a higher concentration of A will lead to an even higher concentration of B. What is your prediction? How would this work? What can it do? Any ideas? Anyone? Hazard a guess. Now in this system, something absolutely bizarre happens. This system now depends actually on how much A and how much B are there in the first instance. If we have only very little of A, not a lot will happen. And I want to show you that with this diagram here. If we have only little of A, then the concentration of A and B will be low. If we have a little bit more, then the concentration of A and B will all of a sudden be very high. This is something that you actually find in quite a number of systems. So for example, in the disease where you have prion proteins. So for example, Alzheimer's. At the beginning, you start off with a very low concentration of these horrible things. Nothing happens. But if through magic or some weird things going on in the cell, you suddenly get a little bit more of A, you go over what is called a critical threshold, and all of a sudden you produce these horrible things. So, this system is also called bistable. It can exist in these two different states, low and high. Now we are talking about things. We have two different pathways, one A and B pathway, and both of these pathways talk to each other. A stops the production of B, and B stops the production of A. What is typically called a crosstalk. And we find that in basically every single biochemical pathway. What happens in a system like that? Think about it for a minute. Talk to the person next to you and try to explain your thinking what could happen in a case like that. What could happen? Does anything happen at all? Does anything happen at all? No? Would we get something that I showed you before, where we get maybe a little bit of oscillation and then A and B stay more or less the same? No? Would we get sort of a bistable system? Probably not, because we don't have a positive feedback loop. What could happen? Sorry? Say it loud. It stops working. Ha! Ha! If it stopped working, then we would all be dead. Because that is very, very common. Now here comes the emergence in it, where we find it very difficult to predict actually how it works. What we see is that either A is high and B is low, or A is low and B is high in this system. So again, it is a bistable system that occurs. You wouldn't have predicted that, would you? Here's another one. We have 3 negative feedback loops. A inhibits B, inhibits C, and C inhibits the production of A. What happens? What do you reckon? Bistable? No. Just plain dead lines? Yes or yes? Yes? Uh-huh. Anything else that could happen? Something very weird happens. Something completely weird happens, which I guess, unless you know these things, you would not have predicted. Oops. The amounts of A start to cycle. They oscillate, but it's a stable oscillation. This is important. This is extremely important when we look at processes in a cell that happen continuously, but that go through cycles. For example, if a cell wants to divide, it has to go through the cell cycle. The cell cycle is exactly regulated by these 3 different inhibition cascades, as we know it. Yeah? So again, that's something really interesting. It's just simply by these 3 different components that inhibit each other. Now, we can go even a step further, and we can build things. That is actually the topic of what is called synthetic biology. Have you heard this term? Synthetic biology allows us, it's a really, I would almost say, shit-hot topic. Synthetic biology allows us to put almost like components together that we nicked from living organisms. And we put them into other organisms, and all of a sudden these organisms can do something that the organisms before couldn't do. So we create, in a way, artificial life. I don't go. Sorry about the blasphemy. Here we have a system. Let me quickly explain to you how this works. We have a component E, and this component is converted into component D. And D is again converted back into E. It is, as we can call it, a reversible process. E to D, D to E. And this reaction is mediated by this component here, X. So X helps that E is converted into D. Now, if we use an inhibitor, and again we will talk about inhibition of reactions, if we use an inhibitor and block this component X, then all that happens is that no conversion from E into D happens, but you still have a conversion from D into E. So, if we've got the inhibitor present, then we don't produce D. So, inhibitor present, and that is sort of binary speak, inhibitor present, no D. No inhibitor present? Yes, D. This thing is actually known in electronics as a NOT gate. Gets better. We can have two of these systems put together. And here's our table. We have now two inhibitors, inhibitor 1 and inhibitor 2. If none of the inhibitor is there, then we don't get any A. If only one of the inhibitors is present, we still don't get any A. Only if both inhibitors are present, then we produce component A. This thing is called an AND gate. Have you heard about these gates? Yeah? Have you ever used these gates? You say no? Not used gate? No? Oh yes, you have. They are the essential components of your phone. They are in the processor of your phone. Couldn't work without these gates. But they are not alive. They are just simply electronic compounds. Here's another one. Getting a little bit more complicated, but remember, our biochemical chart was extremely complicated. This thing is an OR gate. You either have inhibitor 1 or you have inhibitor 2, and you get D. Either or. This is actually a regulation mechanism in the way E. coli, the bacteria, find sugar and respond to sugar. I think this is absolutely fascinating. Life is really mimicking electronics. Or was it the other way around? Now, why do I tell you that? If you think about it, these network motifs that I showed you, they are all components of electronic circuits, of circuit boards. And if you just look at it from afar and squint a little bit, you see the complex network here in the biological system, but then you also see it's fairly complex over here. I can't remember what this was. I think that was just simply a radio or so. I always love to take these things apart and look into it and look at these marvelous connections. I never got it back together. There were always some parts left over when I tried to put it back. Tried that lately with my car. Makes a few rattling noises now. I think I forgot the exhaust. But you see where I'm coming from. Now, why is this so interesting and why is this so important? Now, my dad is an electrical engineer. He is absolutely fantastic. Not just because he's my dad, but he understands these electronic networks. So whenever there's something wrong with a radio or God knows what, with a nuclear power plant or, he gets out his little instruments to measure things. So he goes along and says, oh, I measure here. What is the electric circuit here? What is the electric flow? What is called voltage, I think, or something like that. What is the voltage here? Okay. What is the voltage actually here? What is the voltage here? Oh, look at that. So I know that actually this component here is defective. How he does it, I don't know. I don't understand. But he does it. He can do it. It's amazing. But if these things here are very similar to our biological networks here. Wouldn't we then be able, one day, in the not-too-distant future, to measure what is the concentration of the component here? What is the concentration of the component here? And here? And all of a sudden, then say, right, I've measured that, and therefore I know that a chemical reaction here is not working properly, as it should be. And therefore, then we can try and fix that. So, with our already present knowledge of electronics and electronic networks, and the similarity of biological systems with these electronic components, one day, and it will be during your lifetime, one day we will be in a position to look at biological networks and measure it, what happens in different points, and then fix the problem. We can fix diabetes just simply by looking what is going wrong. We can fix diseases that we don't even know exist by looking at the different points and understanding how the different components of the cell actually interact biologically. So if you like, our aims, and that is really what gets me out of bed in the morning. Yes, I'm a sad person. But, you know, this is what I think. That is the future of biochemistry. We will be able to analyze these biochemical control systems. We use a lot of mathematical modeling. I've shown you these pictures. They come about through mathematical programs. We use visual modeling so that we actually can see what's really happening inside the cell. We use mathematical systems, graph theory. I don't want to bother you, I don't understand it anyway. And we steal from engineering. They have a lot of experience. We use what is called systems control analysis. And of course, this is one side. The other side, these are the biochemists. These are the biomedical scientists. These are the biologists. And they have to speak together. They come together and speak the same language. And I think that is absolutely fascinating. So at the end of the day, what we want is, we want to understand how the properties of a biological network, how these properties integrate with each other, how they work, and model them on electronic circuits, because we understand electronic circuits. And now, we want to be in a position where we can apply our knowledge of electronic circuits and transfer that onto biological systems. Will it work? No doubt about it. But that is really exciting and interesting. Any questions? God, I completely killed you. Well, thank you very much. And I hand over to Francis, who probably won't bother you with all this electronic stuff. But that's shit hot. Thanks, and I shall see you next week.